This Christmas, a billionaire answered his grandmother's call, and a chaotic caregiver changed everything. On the narrow road leading back to his childhood town, Ethan could barely see the scenery. All I could hear, on a loop, was the audio Grandma had sent days before. "I just really wanted to see you this Christmas. You never know how many more there will be, right, my dear?" She didn't say she was dying, but guilt took care of the rest. What good was a billion-dollar empire in technology and artificial intelligence if it might have arrived too late for the most important hug of a lifetime? Ethan had built something the whole world was talking about. His company dominated headlines. His algorithms changed industries. His contracts moved markets. He had learned to measure everything: efficiency, productivity, return on investment. Every minute of his schedule was worth thousands of dollars. Every decision was calculated. Every relationship strategic. But in that rental car, driving alone on snow-covered roads he hadn't seen in over a decade, none of that seemed to matter. Grandma Eleanor's voice echoed in his mind like an alarm he couldn't turn off. That tired tone. Those pauses that were too long. The way she had sighed before hanging up, as if she needed to gather strength just to end the call. He had called back immediately, but she didn't answer. So he called the neighbor, who confirmed with a worried voice, "Yes, dear, she is indeed weaker. The doctor was here last week. I think it would be good if you came." Ethan canceled 3 strategic meetings, rescheduled a presentation to investors, and shocked his team by announcing he would be away indefinitely. Even he didn't know how long he would be gone. He only knew that, for the first time in years, fear was greater than control. The Christmas lights of the small town of Willow Creek appeared on the horizon like an old movie. Decorated porches, snow piled on fences, the same street where he used to ride his bike when everything was still simple. Before the awards, the magazine covers, the events where everyone wanted to talk to him but nobody really knew him. Here, in this tiny town he had left behind in search of something bigger, he had been just Ethan, Mrs. Eleanor's grandson, the boy who helped decorate the tree every December, who stole warm cookies from the kitchen, who sat on the living room floor listening to stories until he fell asleep in her lap. When was the last time he had allowed himself to simply be Ethan? The car stopped in front of the 2-story White House. The windows were lit, the porch adorned with garlands and red ribbons. Smoke rose from the chimney, drawing lazy patterns against the dark winter sky. Everything seemed exactly as in his memories, frozen in time. But what if inside she was different? Too fragile. Too distant. What if he had waited so long that now all that remained was regret? Ethan took a deep breath. The icy air burned his lungs. He grabbed his suitcase from the back seat and walked to the front door, his heart pounding so hard it seemed to echo in his empty chest. When he put the key in his grandmother's door, she always kept a spare key hidden for him even after all these years. His hands trembled. He opened it. A loud bang. "No, no, no, please just hold on for one more little Christmas," a female voice pleaded, arguing with, "A reindeer ornament?" Ethan entered the room just in time to see a woman he had never seen before perched on a chair in the middle of the room, trying to reach a stubborn branch of the garland. The radio played Christmas music. The smell of freshly baked cookies wafted from the kitchen, and she was loudly arguing with the Christmas lights that stubbornly refused to cooperate. "If you turn off your phone again today, I'll throw you in the trash myself, understand? We have a deal here. You blink nicely and I won't replace you. Simple as that." The scene was so absurd, so unexpected, that Ethan was paralyzed for a full 2 seconds. And it was in those 2 seconds that the chair slipped. The woman let out a muffled cry, her arms flailing in the air as she tried to find balance where there was none, and the string of lights she was holding flew toward the Christmas tree. Ethan dropped the bag and moved forward purely on instinct. Her arm, his fright, an ornament flying away, a knee hitting the suitcase, the sound of something breaking. She fell, right into his arms. For a second, the whole world stopped. They stood there breathless, eyes wide, surrounded by chaotically flashing Christmas lights and the smell of cinnamon wafting from the kitchen. She had dark brown hair falling loose over her shoulders, cheeks flushed from exertion, and in her eyes that expression of someone torn between shock and an inexplicable urge to laugh. "Oh my God," she gasped, still clinging to him. You must be the electrician. Or the delivery guy. Or, oh, I hope it's not the gossipy neighbor who's always complaining about the radio volume. Ethan tried to catch his breath, still holding the clumsy stranger in his arms, unsure whether to laugh, wonder who she was, or first check if his grandmother was indeed alive and well somewhere in that house. It was then that he heard, coming from the hallway, the voice he thought he would find weak and distant, but which sounded firm, cheerful, and incredibly good-humored. Ethan, my love, you've arrived. I see you've already met my caregiver. Eleanor appeared in the kitchen doorway, a flowered apron tied around her waist, her hands still covered in flour, and a smile on her face that didn't resemble that of someone on the verge of death. Ethan looked at his grandmother, then at the woman still in his arms, then back at his grandmother. He still believed he had returned to redeem himself with Eleanor, to be present for what might be her last Christmas. He had no idea that that clumsy entrance would be the beginning of the one thing his billion-dollar empire had never been able to give him, a place where he could finally rest and be loved in return. Before we continue, a heartfelt request. Please subscribe to the channel. I would be very grateful for your support. Before we continue, a heartfelt request. Please subscribe to the channel. I would be very grateful for your support. Eleanor served tea as if she hadn't just orchestrated the most embarrassing scene of her grandson's life. Seated in her favorite armchair, with her knitting in her lap and a serene smile on her face, she watched Ethan and Lena recover from the near accident as if she were watching a movie whose ending she already knew. Lena, dear, are you all right? Eleanor asked slowly, stirring the sugar into her tea with slow, deliberate movements. Yes, Mrs. Eleanor, Lena replied, still trying to fix the hair that had escaped from her makeshift ponytail. Sorry for the scare. I swear I was sure the chair was stable. It betrayed me. Ethan was still standing in the middle of the room, trying to process what had just happened. His suitcase was still lying near the door. The Christmas lights blinked erratically on the tree. A broken ornament lay on the floor. And his grandmother, the grandmother he imagined finding frail, perhaps bedridden, possibly on the verge of death, was sitting there, perfectly fine, knitting something that looked like a Christmas stocking. Grandma, he began, his voice still thick with adrenaline and confusion. Are you okay? Oh, my dear. I'm wonderful now that you're here. Eleanor smiled, that gentle smile that used to soothe all his fears when he was a child. Sit here with me. Lena, darling, could you bring my grandson some tea, please? Lena nodded excitedly and disappeared into the kitchen, leaving a trail of flour on the floor and a strange feeling in Ethan's chest. He sat down beside his grandmother, his eyes scanning every detail of her face. The wrinkles around her eyes, her white hair tied in a bun, her hands gripping the knitting needles firmly. She didn't look sick. She looked exactly as she always was. Grandma, when you called, I thought... He paused, unsure how to finish the sentence without sounding accusatory. You said you were feeling weak, that you didn't know how many more Christmases you had left. Eleanor placed the knitting on her lap and held his hand with a tenderness that almost hurt. And I really don't know, my love. Neither of us knows. She squeezed his fingers with surprising force. But I'm so happy you came. It's been so long since we've truly spent Christmas together. Before Ethan could answer, Lena returned from the kitchen carrying a tray with 3 cups of tea, homemade biscuits, and a paper napkin with reindeer designs that she had clearly tried to fold elegantly, but ended up looking more like a botched origami. Here you go. Hot tea, Mrs. Eleanor's biscuits, which are the best in the world, and... She stopped in the middle of the room, staring at the tray with a horrified expression. Oh no, I forgot the sugar. No need, I'll take it without, Ethan said quickly. Are you sure? Because I can pick it up quickly, it's just... I am sure. Lena smiled with relief and placed the tray on the coffee table, but in the process, one of the cups wobbled dangerously. She caught it before it fell, let out a nervous giggle, and finally sat down in the chair on the other side of the room. Ethan picked up his teacup, more out of politeness than desire, and studied the woman in front of him. Lena must have been in her early 30s, perhaps. He wore a moss-green sweater that seemed 2 sizes too big, faded jeans, and snowflake-patterned socks. She wore no makeup. Brown hair fell messily over her shoulders. She had the kind of beauty that didn't scream but stuck in your memory even when you didn't want it to. "So, you're my grandmother's caregiver?" Ethan asked, trying to sound professional. "I am. I mean, I am. Temporarily." Lena stirred her tea, avoiding his gaze. "Mrs. Eleanor hired me 2 weeks ago. I look after her during the day, help with the housework, keep her company, that sort of thing." "And do you have training in nursing? Geriatric care?" Lena hesitated for a fraction of a second before answering. "I have experience in palliative care and elderly care. I worked in a nursing home for 3 years." The answer was too technical for someone who had just fallen off a chair arguing with a flashing light. Ethan frowned, but before he could ask another question, Eleanor interjected. "Lena has been a blessing, my dear. She makes me laugh, tells me stories, and doesn't treat me like I'm made of porcelain." Eleanor looked at the caregiver with genuine affection. "And she makes a carrot cake that's to die for. It's my mother's recipe," Lena murmured, her cheeks flushing slightly. Ethan took a sip of tea, feeling the warmth slide down his throat. But the discomfort in his chest didn't lessen. Something wasn't right. His grandmother didn't seem to need intensive care. The house was spotless, and that clumsy caregiver, who talked to inanimate objects, had just given a professional answer about palliative care, as if she'd memorized it from a manual. "Grandma, I need to talk to your doctor. See the test results. Understand exactly what the situation is." "Of course, my love. We'll sort it out tomorrow. You just arrived today. You must be tired from the trip." Eleanor stood up with an agility that surprised Ethan. "Lena, darling, did you prepare his room? I've got it ready. I changed the sheets, put out clean towels, and even left that lavender sachet you asked for." "Perfect. Ethan, go upstairs and rest a bit. Dinner will be ready in an hour." Ethan wanted to protest. He wanted to call the doctor right now. He wanted to see the medical records. He wanted to put together a plan of action. But his grandmother's look, that look that always meant "don't argue with me now," made him nod and pick up his suitcase. As she climbed the stairs, she heard Lena's low voice coming from the living room. "Mrs. Eleanor, I almost ruined everything. He must think I'm incompetent." "Don't worry, darling, you were perfect." Ethan stopped in the middle of the hallway. "Perfect? Perfect in what way?" He pushed open the bedroom door, the same room where he spent his summer vacations as a child, and found everything exactly as he remembered it. The dark wood bed, the window overlooking the snow-covered backyard, the bookshelf full of old books. But on the bedside table there was something new. A framed photo of him and his grandmother, taken at Christmas 15 years ago. He must have been in his early 20s, recently graduated, still dreaming of changing the world. Eleanor was beside him, smiling with such pride that it seemed to radiate from the photo. Ethan sat on the bed, the photo in his hands, and felt a pang in his chest. When was the last time someone had looked at him like that? With genuine pride, not for the money he earned or the companies he bought, but simply for being him. A gentle knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. "Mr. Ethan?" Lena's voice was hesitant. "Sorry to bother you, but you forgot your coat underneath. It's cold, and I thought it best to bring it." He opened the door. Lena was there, clutching his coat with both hands, her eyes averted from his gaze as if afraid of bothering him. "Thank you," he said, taking his coat. She nodded, and was about to leave when he called her back. "Lena." She stopped. "What does it have to do with it?" "About life. The diagnosis. The prognosis. I need to know." Lena opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. She seemed to be measuring each word before speaking. "She didn't tell me that. She just said she wanted company this Christmas. That she was feeling lonely." Her voice softened, almost sad, and I understood that perfectly. Before Ethan could answer, she hurried down the stairs, leaving behind only the faint scent of cinnamon and something he couldn't quite put his finger on. Perhaps honesty, perhaps sadness. He closed the bedroom door and leaned against it, his head beginning to ache. Something was wrong with this whole story. The grandmother who didn't seem ill, the caregiver who was clumsy but competent, the house full of Christmas decorations as if nothing were wrong. And deep down, very deep down, Ethan began to suspect that he had fallen into some kind of trap. But a trap made of love, homemade cookies, and Christmas lights that didn't work properly. Downstairs in the kitchen, Eleanor and Lena were talking quietly as they prepared dinner. "He's suspicious," Lena murmured, chopping carrots with precise movements that contrasted completely with her clumsy demeanor from minutes ago. "Let him be suspicious," Eleanor replied, stirring the pot on the stove slowly. "Suspicion breeds curiosity. Curiosity breeds attention. And attention, it brings presence." Eleanor smiled. That smile of someone who knew her grandson better than he knew himself. Exactly. Dinner was served at 7 o'clock in the evening, at the antique wooden table that occupied the center of the dining room. Eleanor lit candles, set out red linen napkins, and served a roast that smelled of rosemary and childhood memories. Lena had prepared a salad, baked potatoes, and an apple pie that was still cooling on the kitchen windowsill, like in old movies. Ethan sat at the head of the table, the place that had always belonged to his grandfather before he passed away, and watched the two women talk about recipes, about the snow that promised to fall harder next week, about the neighbor who insisted on decorating her house with so many lights that it looked like an airport. He ate in silence, responding when necessary but mostly observing. The way Eleanor laughed at Lena's lame jokes. The way Lena poured more water even before her grandmother asked. The way the two seemed to have an invisible choreography, each knowing exactly where the other would be at any given moment. It didn't seem like a caregiver-patient relationship. It seemed like complicity. After dinner, Eleanor claimed to be tired and went upstairs to her room. Lena began to collect the dishes, stacking them with excessive care, as if each piece of tableware were too precious to risk. "Let me help," Ethan said, standing up. "No need. I insist." They washed the dishes in silence. Ethan rinsed. Lena dried. The radio in the kitchen played Christmas music softly, and through the window they could see the snowflakes beginning to fall, dancing under the streetlight. That's when Ethan's phone rang. He quickly dried his hands and answered. It was Marcus, his right-hand man at the company, with news about an acquisition that was about to close. Ethan went out onto the back balcony for privacy, leaving the door ajar. Lena continued in the kitchen, finishing putting away the dishes. That's when she noticed Eleanor's medical file on the counter, where her grandmother must have left it earlier while reviewing the medication list. Lena picked it up to put it away in the cupboard, but some pages slipped and fell to the floor. She bent down to pick them up, and that's when Ethan came back in, ending the call. He saw the papers. He saw the doctor's name printed at the top, and before he could control himself, he grabbed one of the sheets that Lena was still holding. This was the result of Eleanor's last checkup. Date: 2 weeks ago. Patient in stable condition, normal blood pressure, blood tests within expected parameters for age. Recommendation: maintain light physical activity, balanced diet, and routine semi-annual follow-up. No serious complications identified. Ethan read it. He read it again. And then he looked up at Lena, who was pale, her hands trembling slightly. "What is this?" His voice came out harsher than he intended. "These are Mrs. Eleanor's test results. I know what they are." Ethan pointed to the specific line. "Conditions are stable. No serious complications. This means she is not dying. That she never was." Lena opened her mouth, but no words came out. "Answer me," he insisted, his voice rising. "Is my grandmother sick or not?" "She's 83 years old, mister." "Ethan, technically anyone that age—" "Don't give me any technicalities." He slammed his hand on the table, making the water glasses tremble. "She called me saying she didn't know if she'd make it through Christmas. She made me drop everything, cancel important meetings, travel all the way here thinking that—" He stopped, his breathing heavy. Anger was mixing with something worse, betrayal, humiliation. "I thought I was going to say goodbye to her," he finished, his voice low and dangerous. "She pretended to be dying to bring me here." Lena stepped forward, her hands still clutching the medical papers as if they were a shield. "She didn't fake dying. She just exaggerated a little." He exaggerated. Ethan gave a bitter laugh. That has another name. It's called manipulation. That's not quite right. Then explain it to me. He threw his arms up in exasperation. Explain to me why you're here, acting like my grandmother needs intensive care when she's clearly fine. Explain to me why you two staged this whole charade. Lena took a deep breath. For the first time since Ethan had arrived, she didn't seem flustered or nervous. She seemed tired, genuinely exhausted. Because she was dying, Mr. Ethan. But not physically. Her voice was firm, laden with an emotion he hadn't expected. She was dying of loneliness, of longing, of seeing the grandson she raised become a stranger who only appears on formal occasions with expensive gifts and quick hugs. The words hit Ethan like a punch to the stomach. You don't have the right. Yes, I do. Lena interrupted, her eyes glistening with restrained tears. Because I've seen this happen before. I cared for an 86-year-old woman who died surrounded by flowers with a full bank account in a private hospital room, completely alone. Her children were too busy to visit her. Her grandchildren didn't even know she was hospitalized. And do you know what the last thing she said to me was? Ethan didn't answer. He couldn't. She said, I didn't want money, I just wanted someone to hold my hand. Lena's voice broke. And I did. A stranger. Because no one from her family was there. The silence that settled in the kitchen was dense, heavy like the snow that was accumulating outside. Your grandmother doesn't want your money, Mr. Ethan. She wants you, your presence, your attention, your time. Lena wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. And if she needed to exaggerate some symptoms to get that, maybe the problem isn't just hers. Ethan felt something break inside him. Anger, shame, guilt. It all mixed together in a jumble of emotions he didn't know how to process. He had always known how to manage corporate crises, negotiate complex contracts, anticipate market movements. But this raw and painful emotional confrontation? He had no control whatsoever. She should have talked to me, he said, his voice hoarse. Told me the truth. She tried. Eleanor's voice came from the kitchen doorway. Ethan and Lena turned at the same time. Their grandmother was there, still dressed in her light blue robe, her hair loose over her shoulders. She looked smaller than he remembered. More frail. Not physically, but in a way that hurt to see. Grandfather, I've called you 6 times in the last 3 months, Ethan. Eleanor entered the kitchen slowly, each step measured. I left messages. I sent emails. I tried to schedule a video call. You were always busy. Always had a meeting, a flight, an important presentation. Ethan opened his mouth to defend himself, but the words died before they were born. Because she was right. He knew she was. So yes, Eleanor continued, her voice trembling slightly. I exaggerated. I said I was feeling weak, that the doctor was worried, that I didn't know how many more Christmases I had. She stopped in front of him, her brown eyes filled with a sadness that seemed ancient. Because it was the only way you would really listen to me. That doesn't justify lying to me. And is being absent justified? The question came out low but sharp. I raised you, Ethan. I held you when your parents couldn't. I taught you to read, to ride a bike, to do math. I was at every school presentation, every graduation. Her voice broke. And now that I'm old, that I need you, you don't have time. Ethan felt a tightness in his throat. He wanted to shout that she was being unfair, that he was building something important, that it wasn't that simple. But deep down, way down deep, he knew she was right. I didn't want it to be like this, he murmured. But it was. Eleanor cupped his face in her hands, just like she did when he was a child, and needed to make sure he was paying attention. And I was afraid, my dear. Afraid of really dying and you only showing up for the funeral. Afraid of becoming a vague memory in your busy schedule. Something inside Ethan broke. He pulled away from her hands, unable to bear that touch, so heavy with love and disappointment at the same time. I need to think, he said, his voice coming out rough. I can't do it right now. He left the kitchen without looking back. He climbed the stairs 2 steps at a time, locked himself in his room and leaned against the door, his breathing erratic. Downstairs, Eleanor collapsed into a kitchen chair, her face in her hands. Lena knelt beside her, holding her trembling hands. I ruined everything, Eleanor whispered. I just wanted him back and ended up pushing him further away. No, Mrs. Eleanor. He just needs time to process. What if he leaves tomorrow? What if I lose him forever? Lena had no answer for that, because for the first time since accepting the job, she too was afraid that the plan had failed irreversibly. Upstairs, Ethan opened his laptop and began searching for flights back to New York. The first available flight was tomorrow at 10 in the morning. He could be back in the office before lunch, regain control of the situation, return to the world that made sense. But as he typed in his credit card details to confirm the purchase, his eyes fell again on the photo beside the bed. Him and Eleanor 15 years ago, her gaze radiating genuine pride, his smile still not tired, still not hardened. When did he stop being that man? He closed his laptop without buying the ticket, but he also couldn't clear the search screen, because deep down, he still didn't know what hurt more. Having been manipulated, or discovering that he needed to be manipulated in order to finally pay attention to what really mattered. If this story touched a nerve, tell me. At what point in your life did you start to believe you weren't enough? Write in the comments. Your feelings matter, and they are welcome here. No judgment, no rush, just acceptance. Morning arrived without warning. Ethan hadn't slept. He'd spent the entire night sitting on the edge of his bed, alternating between looking at his open laptop and the framed photo beside him. The 10 o'clock flight was still there on the screen, waiting for just a click of confirmation. He could be back in the office before lunch, regain control, return to a world that made sense, but something prevented him from clicking confirm purchase. When he went down to the kitchen at 6:30 in the morning, he found Lena already awake, silently preparing coffee. She didn't look at him when she came in. She just pushed a steaming cup toward him and went back to stirring something in the pot with mechanical movements. "Good morning," he said, his voice hoarse with tiredness. "Good morning," she replied without emotion. The silence that settled in was dense, awkward. Ethan took a sip of his coffee. It was too strong, too bitter, but he didn't complain. "Has my grandmother woken up yet?" "Not yet. She had a rough night." Lena paused, her back still turned to him. "She cried a lot." Guilt gripped Ethan's chest like a vice. He opened his mouth to say something, but he didn't know what. Apologies seemed empty. Explanations seemed like justifications. "I didn't mean to hurt her," he murmured. Lena finally turned around. Her eyes were red and swollen. She hadn't slept either. But it hurt. Her voice was tired, lacking the energy of the previous day. "And now? Are you going to leave and abandon her again?" "Is that it?" "She lied to me. And you abandoned her for years." Lena crossed her arms, her posture defensive but her voice broken. "So I guess you two have scores to settle. The difference is that at least she tried to bring you back. You just want to run away." The words hit Ethan like stones thrown with precision. He wanted to fight back. He wanted to defend himself, but deep down he knew she was right. "You don't know me well enough to judge me like that." "I know enough." Lena moved closer, her eyes fixed on his. "I know that look, that posture, that way of turning everything into a strategy and a problem to be solved. I've seen it before." "Where did you see?" She hesitated. For a second, it seemed she was going to retreat, to go back behind the armor she had built. But then she took a deep breath and said, "In my father's name." Ethan remained silent, waiting for her to continue. He was an executive at a multinational company, always traveling, always in meetings, always too important to be present. Lena's voice began to tremble. "My mother got sick when I was 22. Cancer. She asked him to come home to be with her for the last few months. He said he would come back as soon as he closed a deal. Then it was another negotiation. Then another project." Ethan felt his stomach churn. When he finally returned, she had already left. He missed the farewell by 3 hours. 3 hours. Lena wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "And do you know what he told me at the funeral? That he regretted it. That if he could go back in time, he would give it all up. That no amount of money was worth that emptiness. That's why I dropped out of law school and went to work in a nursing home." She continued, the words now streaming down her face. "Because I didn't want other people to die alone. I didn't want other families to live with that regret." And when Mrs. Eleanor called me, asking for help with her plan, I saw a chance to prevent you and her from ending up the same way." Ethan felt a tightening in his throat. Lena wasn't just a hired caregiver. She'd accepted the job because she was trying to save something she hadn't been able to save in her own family. "I'm so sorry for what you went through," he said, his voice low and sincere. "I don't want you to feel sorry for me." Lena shook her head, her eyes shining with determination. "I want you not to make the same mistake my father made. Because in 10, 20 years, when your grandmother is no longer here, you won't remember the meetings you canceled. You won't be proud of the deals you closed. You'll only remember that you had the chance to be there, and you chose to run away." The silence that followed was different from the previous one. It wasn't awkward. It was truly heavy. A painful truth. That's when Eleanor appeared in the kitchen doorway. She was wearing a bathrobe. Her hair was loose. Her eyes were tired. She looked like she had aged 10 years overnight. "Ethan," she began, her voice trembling. "If you want to leave, I understand. I shouldn't have lied. I shouldn't have forced you to come. I was just so afraid of losing you forever." He looked at his grandmother. He really looked. And for the first time in years, he saw beyond the strong, resilient figure he had always imagined. He saw an 83-year-old woman, frail, not in body, but in heart. A woman who had raised a grandson alone, who had sacrificed so much to give him every opportunity, and who now just wanted some of his time back. "Grandfather, you don't need to say anything." Eleanor raised her hand, interrupting him. "I know I was wrong. I know you have your life, your responsibilities. I don't want to be another burden on your schedule. You were never a burden. But I wasn't a priority either, was I?" The question came out low, but sharp. Ethan couldn't answer, because it was true. Brutal, painful, but true. Eleanor nodded as if the lack of response was confirmation enough. "Then go. Go back to your life. I'll be fine." She tried to smile, but it was the saddest smile Ethan had ever seen. Just promise me one thing. Next time I call, don't let it go straight to voicemail. Even if you can't answer right away, call back later. I just need to know that I still matter a little." She turned to leave the kitchen, her steps slow, her shoulders hunched. And it was in that moment, watching the woman who had raised him walk away as if she were carrying the weight of the world, that something inside Ethan finally broke. It wasn't a cinematic moment of revelation. There was no background music or dramatic lighting. It was just the sudden, devastating feeling that if he let that woman leave that kitchen without doing anything, he would be making the biggest mistake of his life. "Grandma, wait." Eleanor stopped at the door but did not turn around. "I'm not leaving." Now she turned around, her eyes wide with surprise. "What?" "I said I'm not leaving. Not yet." Ethan approached her, his heart pounding. "You're right. I've been absent. I've put everything before you, and that was unfair. My dear, you don't need to stay out of pity. It's not out of pity." He held her hands, feeling how cold and trembling they were. "It's because I realized I'm very afraid. Afraid to stop. Afraid to slow down. Because if I stop, I'll have to face how empty I am inside. How I've built an empire but have no one to share it with." Eleanor squeezed his hands, tears streaming down her face. "You are never empty, my love. You just forgot that there are people who truly love you." On the other side of the kitchen, Lena watched the scene with her hands on her chest, trying to control her own tears. She had succeeded. The plan had worked. Not perfectly, not without pain, but it had worked. Ethan hugged his grandmother and, for the first time in over a decade, allowed himself to simply feel. Not control, not plan, just be present. But as she embraced Eleanor, her eyes met Lena's over her grandmother's shoulder, and something passed between them. A silent recognition, a muted gratitude, and perhaps, just perhaps, the beginning of something neither of them was ready to name yet. The days that followed were strange for Ethan. Strange not because anything was wrong, but because for the first time in over a decade, he didn't have complete control over every minute of his routine. He would wake up without an alarm. He would have breakfast at the kitchen table while Eleanor told him stories about the neighborhood. He helped Lena decorate the rest of the house for Christmas. and discovered that holding a ladder while she hung garlands wasn't so bad after all, even if she insisted on talking to each ornament as if they were old friends. The laptop remained in the room, locked. The cell phone vibrated occasionally with urgent messages from the team, but Ethan had sent a clear message. He was on indefinite leave. Marcus nearly had a heart attack when he read the message. "You've never taken leave in your life," Eleanor remarked on the third morning while knitting in the armchair by the fireplace. "Not even when you broke your arm at 16. "I know." Ethan was sitting on the floor helping Lena assemble a miniature Christmas village on the coffee table. Or rather, trying to help while she rearranged everything he put down. "I think I was scared." "Afraid of what?" Lena asked, placing a gingerbread house next to the little church. "To stop and realize that I no longer knew who I was without work." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that gave space for the truth to breathe. "And now?" Eleanor asked gently. "Did you find out?" Ethan looked around. At the twinkling Christmas tree in the corner of the room. At the crackling fireplace releasing the scent of burning wood. At the stockings hanging on the wall, one with his name embroidered on it. The same one Eleanor had kept for 15 years, waiting for him to come back and wear it. At Lena, intently positioning a miniature snowman, her tongue slightly sticking out in total concentration. "Not yet," he admitted. "But I think I'm starting to look in the right places." Lena looked up at him, and for a split second something passed between them, something silent but intense. Recognition, perhaps, or gratitude, or something neither of them was ready to name yet. That afternoon, Eleanor asked Lena to take her to her routine doctor's appointment in town. Ethan offered to drive, but Grandma declined with a mysterious smile. "You stay here and rest, my dear. Enjoy your free afternoon." He should have been suspicious. Alone in the silent house, Ethan went up to the attic, something he hadn't done since adolescence. Up there, among dusty boxes and old decorations, he found photo albums that Eleanor had treasured. He sat on the creaking wooden floor and began to leaf through the pages. There were photos of him at every stage of his life. First day of school, high school graduation, receiving the award for best student. Eleanor was in all of them, always by his side, always smiling with that immense pride. But as the years went by, the number of photos dwindled. The last album had only 3 photos from the last 10 years, all of them taken at formal events with Ethan in a suit, a professional smile, a rigid posture, Eleanor beside him trying to smile, but her eyes wouldn't follow. That's when he saw the notebook. It was underneath the last album, wrapped in faded floral fabric. Ethan hesitated before opening it. It felt like an invasion of privacy. But curiosity won out. It was Eleanor's diary. Not the entire diary, just entries from the last 5 years, all about him. March 15th. I called Ethan today. He was in a meeting. He said he'd call me back. It's been 3 days already. July 22nd. I saw an interview with him on television. He looked so tired, so different from the cheerful boy who used to run around in the yard. Does anyone else notice that besides me? December 5th. I sent the invitation for Christmas. He replied that he might not be able to come. Maybe became the new no between us. Ethan read page after page, each word tightening his chest like a vice. Eleanor had documented every attempt at connection, every unanswered call, every broken promise. But there was no anger in the words, only longing, only love that ached from accumulating so much without anywhere to go. The last entry was from 3 weeks ago. I've made a decision. I'm going to exaggerate the symptoms. I'm going to make him believe I'm more fragile than I really am. I know it's wrong. I know it's manipulation. But I'd rather he come out of pity than not come at all. I hired a woman named Lena to help me with the plan. She understands. She lost her mother the same way, to absence disguised as importance. Maybe together we can bring my grandson back. Not for me, but for himself. Before it's too late. Ethan closed the notebook, his hands trembling. Hot tears streamed down his face unbidden. He hadn't cried since his grandfather's funeral 15 years ago. He had convinced himself that successful men didn't have time for tears. But there, alone in the dusty attic, he collapsed. When Eleanor and Lena returned 2 hours later, they found Ethan in the kitchen, preparing dinner. He had come down from the attic with red eyes, washed his face, and decided to do something he had never done before: cook his grandmother's favorite recipe. It was a mess. Flour everywhere, pots piled up in the sink, but it smelled of rosemary and genuine effort. "Ethan, what are you doing?" Eleanor asked, surprised. "Trying to make that roast chicken you used to make every Sunday when I was a kid." He turned, holding a wooden spoon covered in sauce. "I don't know if it turned out well. It's probably awful. But I tried." Eleanor placed her hand on her chest, her eyes shining. "My dear, I read your diary." He interrupted, his voice choked with emotion. "I'm sorry. I know I shouldn't have, but I did. And I need you to know that I'm so sorry. For everything. For every missed call, every broken promise, every lost Christmas. Ethan, let me finish." He put down the spoon and approached her. "You shouldn't have lied. But I shouldn't have forced you to get to this point either. You didn't need to pretend to be dying for me to realize how much you matter. You always have. I was so afraid to stop and realize how empty I was that I kept running. And in the process, I abandoned the only person who had always been by my side." Eleanor held his face, tears now streaming freely. "You didn't abandon me, my love. You just got a little lost. But now you found yourself again." Lena watched from the doorway, trying to remain invisible, but Ethan called to her with his gaze. "Come here." She hesitated, but then approached. "Thank you," he said simply, "for agreeing to be a part of this crazy plan, for taking care of her, for showing me that I was wrong about so many things." Lena gave a small, vulnerable smile. "I didn't do anything wrong." "Yes, it did." He held her hand, and the electricity of their touch took them both by surprise. "You reminded me that there's still goodness in the world, that it's still worth slowing down, that—" He paused, realizing he didn't know how to finish that sentence without revealing too much. Eleanor looked at the two of them, held their clasped hands, and smiled as if she had just seen the last piece of the puzzle fall into place. "I think dinner can wait another 15 minutes, she said, grabbing her coat. "I'm going for a walk to my neighbor's house." "Grandma, you don't need to." "Yes, I need to." She winked and left, leaving Ethan and Lena alone in the kitchen, still holding hands, the air heavy with everything that wasn't being said. And it was Lena who broke the silence. "Are you going to stay?" The question was simple, but it carried the weight of everything that might come after. Ethan had no answer. Not yet. But for the first time in years, he wanted to find out. If this story moved you, subscribe now to help me promote the channel and so you don't miss our next stories. Also, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. And remember, you were never insignificant. You were just surrounded by people who didn't see your worth. Christmas arrived in Willow Creek like an unexpected embrace. The snow fell gently, covering the streets with a white blanket that seemed to purify everything. At Eleanor's house, the lights on the tree twinkled slowly, like the beats of a heart finally at peace. Ethan woke up early that morning of December 25th, the first Christmas in years that he hadn't spent in an impersonal hotel or at a last-minute meeting. He went downstairs and found his grandmother in the kitchen preparing the turkey. She wasn't alone. Lena was helping, laughing at something Eleanor had just told her. The two seemed like a perfect pair, one with the wisdom of years, the other with an energy that lit up the room. "Merry Christmas, Grandma," Ethan said, hugging Eleanor from behind as she stirred the stuffing. "Merry Christmas, my dear." She turned and kissed him on the forehead, just like she used to when he was little. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than it has been in a long time." Lena glanced at him, a shy smile on her lips. Since that night in the kitchen, something had changed between them. It wasn't a fairy tale romance, it was something real, built on exchanged glances, hands that accidentally touched, and conversations that lasted until the wee hours. Ethan had discovered that Lena had more than just charming disasters. She had a quiet strength, forged in losses that made her exactly who she was. The day passed at a lazy, delightful pace. They opened presents in the living room, nothing extravagant. Eleanor gave Ethan a hand-knitted scarf, the same one she had started years ago and finished the previous week. "To remind you that warmth comes from people, not machines," she said. Lena received an album of Eleanor's old photos, filled with stories her grandmother told in vivid detail. Ethan, in turn, surprised them both with something simple but meaningful: a reservation for a weekend in a mountain cabin, just the three of them. No schedules, no plans, just time to be together. As the sun set, tinging the sky orange and pink, they sat on the porch with hot chocolate. The snow stopped, leaving the air fresh and pure. Ethan watched the two women who had changed everything. Eleanor, with her loving stubbornness, who had brought him back to real life. Lena, with her awkward courage, who had shown him that vulnerability was not weakness. "You know, Grandma," Ethan began, his voice low, "I've thought a lot about what you wrote in your diary, about watching me grow up, about believing in myself when I didn't." Eleanor shook his hand. "I always believed, my love. You just needed to see yourself through my eyes." Lena remained silent, but her eyes said what words didn't need to. Ethan felt a warmth in his chest that no billion-dollar empire could buy. He leaned toward her, and the kiss came naturally, soft, like falling snow. It wasn't the end of a journey. It was the beginning of a new one. That night, as the stars shone over Willow Creek, Ethan called Marcus and announced changes at the company. Nothing drastic, just a foundation to support the elderly and caregivers, inspired by Eleanor and Lena. "We're going to invest in real connections," he said, "because in the end, that's what matters." Eleanor watched from the sofa, her knitting in her lap, a satisfied smile on her face. Her plan hadn't been perfect, but it had worked. She had gotten her grandson back, and as a bonus, she had gained a larger family. As the fireplace crackled and the Christmas lights illuminated the room, Ethan wondered, what if the true miracle of Christmas wasn't magic, but the courage to repair what time had tried to erase? What if the greatest gift was simply choosing to stay? The answer came in a sigh from Lena beside her, and in an "I love you," murmured by Eleanor. Christmas wasn't over. It was only just beginning. For all of them. But deep in Ethan's mind, a question lingered, as gentle as a promise. What else would he discover if he continued to choose his heart over his watch?